The Mafia boss saw his black Maid comforting his autistic son. His heart changed forever. Vincent Mallory, the powerful and ruthless Mafia boss, had always prided himself on his control. His empire spanned industries, and his reputation in the underworld was unparalleled. People feared him, and he made sure they did. But all of that would change today, the moment he walked into his son's nursery. Ethan Mallory, his 6-year-old son, was diagnosed with autism at a young age. The diagnosis had been a blow to Vincent, though he would never admit it to anyone. The weight of his responsibilities and the image of perfection he had to uphold kept him from fully embracing his role as a father. Ethan had always been difficult to manage. His tantrums, his inability to communicate, and the way he shut himself off from the world frustrated Vincent to no end. For a long time, he had distanced himself from his son, relying on nannies and caretakers to handle the emotional aspects of fatherhood. Today, however, something felt different. The house was eerily quiet, the way it always was when Ethan's episodes became too much. Vincent's gaze shifted to the nursery door. Inside, his trusted maid, Maya Johnson, a quiet woman with a heart of gold, was sitting beside his son. She was gently humming a soft lullaby. Maya had been with the Mallory family for nearly 5 years. Though she had always kept her distance, never asking for anything, Vincent had always noticed the way she cared for Ethan. Today, however, was different. As he watched from the doorway, he saw something he had never seen before, a motherly bond, pure and unspoken, that transcended the walls of class and status. Maya was holding Ethan's tiny hand, whispering comforting words as she wiped away his tears. The scene was not what Vincent had expected. His heart, which had long been hardened by years of power and control, stirred in a way he had never experienced. The power he wielded over his enemies, the fear he instilled in others, none of that seemed as important as the sight before him. For the first time in a long while, Vincent felt a flicker of something deeper, something human. He had always thought of Maya as just another member of the staff, invisible to him. But now, as he watched her care for Ethan, he realized how wrong he had been. This woman, this quiet, unassuming woman, was doing something he had never been able to do: offer his son the compassion and patience he needed. Vincent stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene. He had spent so many years building his empire, focusing on power and control, that he had forgotten the simple act of kindness. It was a lesson he had never thought he would learn from someone like Maya. But here she was, teaching him more about love and sacrifice than anyone else ever could. Vincent remained frozen at the doorway, but Maya did not notice him yet, because all of her attention was focused on Ethan and the small, careful world she was trying to protect around him. Ethan's breathing came in short, uneven bursts. His fingers curled tightly into the fabric of her sleeve, as if letting go might cause everything to collapse. Maya lowered herself fully to the floor, so she was at eye level with him, her movements slow and deliberate, the way she had learned to move around frightened children long before she ever stepped foot into the Mallory estate. She spoke softly, not in rushed sentences, but in steady, simple phrases, telling Ethan that he was safe, that the room was quiet, that nothing bad was happening, that he was allowed to feel overwhelmed and still be okay. She did not try to force him to look at her, did not touch him unless he reached for her first, because she understood that comfort could never be demanded, only offered. Maya had learned this the hard way years ago, back when her younger nephew had been diagnosed on the spectrum, back when doctors used words that sounded clinical and cold while her family struggled to make sense of a child who experienced the world differently. She remembered the sleepless nights, the sudden noises that caused panic, the way patience mattered more than instructions, and how love often meant sitting quietly on the floor for as long as it took. That memory lived in her bones, guiding her now as she gently hummed again, a low melody her grandmother used to sing when storms rattled the windows back home. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ethan's grip loosened, his shoulders lowering as the tension began to drain from his small body. Vincent watched. All of this in silence, his chest tight in a way he could not explain. He had hired specialists, therapists, and consultants who charged more per hour than most people earned in a day, yet none of them had ever calmed his son like this. They came with charts and schedules, with confident voices and rehearsed reassurances, but they never stayed long enough to truly see Ethan. Maya stayed. She always stayed. Vincent realized, with an uncomfortable clarity, how many moments he had missed by choosing distance over discomfort. He had convinced himself that providing everything money could buy was enough, that love could be outsourced, that his role was to protect from afar. Watching Maya now shattered that illusion. He noticed the way Ethan leaned closer to her voice, the way his eyes softened instead of darting around the room, and the guilt hit Vincent harder than any threat ever had. This was not a failure he could intimidate away or negotiate out of. It was quiet, undeniable, and entirely his own. A floorboard creaked beneath Vincent's shoe, and Maya finally looked up, her eyes widening for a split second when she saw him standing there. Instinctively, she shifted her body slightly in front of Ethan, not in defiance, but in protection, as if shielding him from a world that too often misunderstood him. Her voice did not waver when she spoke. She did not apologize immediately. She simply said that Ethan had been scared, that the noise from the hallway had overwhelmed him, and that she could not leave him alone like that. The room seemed to hold its breath. Vincent expected anger to rise in him, expected the familiar reflex of control, but instead there was only a strange heaviness, a sense that whatever he said next would matter more than he was prepared to admit. Ethan glanced up at his father briefly, then back to Maya, his fingers tightening again as if bracing himself. That small gesture broke something open inside Vincent. He realized his son was not afraid of Maya being there. He was afraid of losing her presence. Vincent took a step forward, then stopped, unsure how to enter this fragile space without shattering it. For the first time in his life, power felt useless. All that remained was the uncomfortable truth that the person he had overlooked, the woman he barely spoke to, understood his son in ways he never had. And standing there, watching Maya quietly soothe Ethan without expecting praise or permission, Vincent felt the beginning of a change he could not yet name, but already knew he could never undo. Vincent stood there for a long time, not knowing whether to step forward or retreat. Maya had turned back to Ethan, and the soft hum of her voice filled the room again, an invisible barrier that Vincent could feel pressing against him. It was strange, this feeling, because he had never been one to hesitate. His entire life had been a series of bold moves, calculated risks, and ruthless decisions. But here, in this room, with Maya gently soothing his son, everything felt different. For the first time in years, Vincent felt small, insignificant even. It was as if the power he had so carefully cultivated over the years had no place here. His gaze shifted to Ethan, whose eyes were half-lidded, still trembling but slowly calming. The sight of his son finding peace in Maya's presence felt like a revelation. He had never seen Ethan this vulnerable, and yet there was something deeply moving about the way Maya treated him. She didn't see his condition as something to fix. She simply accepted him as he was, no questions asked, no expectations. And that, Vincent realized, was what his son needed most. He had spent so much time trying to protect Ethan from the world, trying to shield him with money and power, but what Ethan needed wasn't protection. It was understanding. It was care. It was compassion. And for the first time, Vincent wasn't sure he could provide that for his son. Maya, on the other hand, seemed to have an endless well of it. As if sensing the shift in the air, Maya paused in her humming and looked up at Vincent. There was no fear in her eyes, no discomfort, just quiet acceptance. She had been in his world for years, but they had never really shared anything more than brief, polite exchanges. Now, their connection felt different. Vincent found his voice, low and hesitant, but unmistakably real. "Thank you," he said, though the words seemed inadequate in the face of what he had just witnessed. Maya's expression softened, and for a moment, the power dynamics between them seemed to disappear. She gave a small nod, her attention returning to Ethan, who was now resting against her, calm and peaceful. Vincent swallowed hard, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. The Mafia boss, the man who had controlled every corner of his world, felt entirely helpless in this moment. He had spent years building walls around his heart, believing that the cold, distant approach was the only way to survive in a world where weakness was never tolerated. But now, in this room, with Maya and Ethan, he wondered if he had been wrong all along. The silence between them stretched out, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the pause before a new beginning. Maya finally stood up, careful not to disturb Ethan, who was still asleep in her arms. Vincent watched her every move, and for the first time, he realized just how much strength she carried. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from power or intimidation. It was the quiet strength of someone who understood the value of patience, the value of being there for someone, even when it was hard. As Maya turned to leave the room, she looked back at Vincent, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. In that glance, something passed between them, something Vincent couldn't quite name. It was respect, but it was also something more. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of the shift that had just occurred, not just in the room, but within him. Vincent stood there for a long time after she left, his mind racing. He had always believed that control was the key to everything, that keeping people at a distance was the only way to protect himself and his family. But now, in the quiet of Ethan's nursery, he realized that the true strength lay not in control, but in vulnerability. Had just witnessed, not after seeing the way she had touched Ethan's heart in a way he never could. He knew that, in his world, loyalty was everything. And in that moment, Vincent Mallory knew that Maya had earned his loyalty. But more importantly, she had earned Ethan's trust. And that was something he could never take for granted. Vincent spent the next few days in a haze, caught between his growing admiration for Maya and the strange sense of unease that had settled into his bones. His mind couldn't escape the image of her sitting with Ethan, the way she had held him so gently, the way Ethan had calmed under her touch. It was a sight Vincent had never imagined he would see in his own home, much less from someone like Maya. The walls he had built around himself and his family were now starting to feel fragile, as though they might crumble at any moment. Maya was different from anyone he had ever met. She had no ambition to climb the ranks of the world he controlled. She wasn't seeking power or wealth, and yet she had something that no one in his world could match: real, genuine compassion. She had treated Ethan not as a project to be fixed, but as a person to be understood, and in doing so, she had done what Vincent himself had struggled to do for years. As the days passed, Vincent found himself seeking out Maya more often, watching her interact with Ethan and noticing the little things that made her special. He watched the way she patiently guided Ethan through each task, never showing frustration, never giving up on him. It was like she had a natural gift, a sixth sense for knowing what Ethan needed, when to push him, and when to just sit quietly beside him. It was a gift Vincent didn't know how to nurture, but Maya seemed to know instinctively. One afternoon, as Vincent sat in his office going over reports, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was Maya, standing in the doorway, her usual quiet composure in place. "Mr. Mallory," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "I wanted to speak with you for a moment." Vincent looked up from his papers, meeting her gaze. For a brief moment, he could see the hesitation in her eyes, as if she were unsure of how to approach him, despite the fact that they had shared this space for years. "Of course," he said, setting the papers aside and gesturing for her to come in. Maya entered, but instead of sitting across from him as she usually did, she took a seat next to him, a little closer than Vincent had expected. "How is Ethan today?" he asked, trying to make the conversation feel more natural. Maya smiled softly, the warmth in her expression unmistakable. "He's doing well. He's more relaxed than he's been in days. I think he's starting to trust me more," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. Vincent nodded, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. He had never been able to give Ethan the kind of stability that Maya had. It was a bitter realization, but it was also one that opened his eyes to just how much he had missed. "I wanted to thank you," Maya continued, her voice lowering slightly as she spoke, "for trusting me with him. I know I'm just the maid, and my place is not to interfere with family matters, but I believe I can help him, if you're willing to let me." Vincent was silent for a long moment. The words she had spoken rang in his ears. Just the maid. The phrase stung, but it was also a reality he couldn't deny. She wasn't just the maid. She had become someone who had proven she could do something he had never managed. She had earned his trust without even trying. "You've done more for Ethan than I ever could," Vincent said, his voice low, sincere. "And I owe you more than I can ever repay." Maya's eyes widened slightly at his words, but she quickly composed herself. "I only want what's best for him," she said softly. "I know I can't replace you, Mr. Mallory, but if you'll allow me, I can continue to help him in ways you might not be able to." Vincent was struck by the sincerity in her words. He had never thought of himself as someone who needed help, but in this moment, he realized how much he did. He had always believed that power meant control, but here was Maya, a woman with no title, no wealth, offering him something more valuable than anything money could buy: help, kindness, and understanding. It was a gift he had never expected. "You're not just helping him, Maya," Vincent said quietly, his gaze fixed on her. "You're changing everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." There was a long silence between them, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. Maya's gaze softened, but she did not say anything more. Vincent felt a sudden urge to change things, to make a commitment he had never thought he would make. "I want you to stay," he said, his voice firm now, as though he had made up his mind. "I want you to be more than just his caretaker. I want you to be a part of this family. You've proven yourself to me, and I trust you, Maya." Maya's eyes flickered with surprise, but she quickly masked it with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Mr. Mallory. I promise I'll do everything I can." As she stood to leave, Vincent felt an unfamiliar sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. He had no illusions about the challenges ahead, but with Maya's help, he was finally starting to understand what it meant to truly protect his family. The journey ahead would not be easy, but with Maya by his side, Vincent Mallory felt ready to face whatever came his way. Days turned into weeks, and life at the Mallory estate continued, but for Vincent, everything had changed. He found himself thinking about Maya more often, reflecting on the impact she had already made on his family. Ethan, once a boy who struggled to connect, was now more at ease. Vincent had witnessed it himself. Ethan's laughter coming easier, his tantrums less frequent, and his moments of joy more genuine. Maya's presence had brought a sense of calm to the house that Vincent hadn't realized it lacked. Maya never asked for credit, never expected praise. She simply did what she did best. She cared. It was a quiet kind of care, not the kind that demanded attention or recognition, but the kind that made a difference in ways that only those who truly understood could appreciate. As Vincent spent more time with his son, he began to see the subtle shifts. Ethan would reach out for his hand more, would look for him in a crowd, and even started to speak more, though still in small, hesitant words. But these were victories. They were his victories, and they were thanks to Maya. It wasn't just Ethan's life that had improved. Vincent had started to change too. The walls he had so carefully built around his emotions began to crumble, piece by piece. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something real, not just the Mafia empire he had spent his life building, but a family. His family. And in that family, Maya had found her place. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings and business calls, Vincent found himself walking into the kitchen for a late dinner. Maya was there, preparing a meal, as she usually did, her movements graceful and efficient. When she saw him, she smiled softly, the same smile that had become a constant in his life over the past few weeks. "You're home late," she said, her voice light, as if she wasn't fully aware of the weight of her words. "It's been a long day," Vincent replied, his tone tired but warm. He moved to the counter where she was working, his eyes resting on the meal she was preparing. "You've been doing this for years, haven't you?" he asked, surprised at how familiar the kitchen felt with her in it. Maya paused, glancing up at him, a small frown tugging at the corners of her lips. "Doing what?" she asked, genuinely curious. Vincent looked around the room, taking in the way it had transformed. It was no longer just a space for meals. It had become a place of comfort, a place where they could gather without the weight of the world bearing down on them. "Being here, doing what you do," Vincent said softly. "I don't think I ever really noticed how much you've been a part of this family, Maya." She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she gave a small nod. "I don't need recognition," she said quietly, turning back to the stove. "I'm just here to help." Vincent stood there for a moment, watching her as she worked. He had always admired her work ethic, but it wasn't just her dedication that had impressed him. It was the way she made everyone around her feel seen, feel important. Even in the quietest moments, she had a way of making people feel like they mattered. "I've never said it, but thank you," Vincent said, his voice low but sincere. Maya looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. "You don't have to thank me," she said, her tone gentle. I'm just doing what needs to be done. Vincent took a step closer, feeling an odd sense of urgency in his chest. No, he said firmly. You've done more than that. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed. I don't know how to repay you for that. Maya paused for a moment, her gaze lingering on him, before she let out a quiet sigh. You don't need to repay me, she said, her voice soft. You're doing it every day by being there for Ethan, by being present. Vincent's heart tightened at her words. For the first time, he realized how much he had been absent from his own life, how much he had focused on building his empire instead of building relationships with the people who mattered most. But now, with Maya's quiet guidance, he was starting to see that the empire he had built meant nothing if he didn't have his family to share it with. I'm trying, he said, his voice tinged with a sense of vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to be better. For Ethan. For you. For all of us. Maya gave him a small smile, the kind of smile that held no judgment, only understanding. I know, she said softly. And that's all that matters. The moment stretched between them, comfortable and unhurried, before Vincent finally spoke again. I don't know what the future holds, Maya, but I know one thing. I want you to be a part of it. I don't just mean with Ethan. I mean with everything. Maya's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she seemed unsure of how to respond. But then she nodded slowly, her gaze softening. I'm already part of it, she said quietly. In my own way, I'm already here. Vincent felt a strange weight lift off his shoulders as her words sank in. He had spent so long believing that the people around him were either allies or enemies, but Maya had shown him something different. She had shown him the value of being there for others, of being present, of caring without expecting anything in return. It was a lesson he had never learned until now. As Vincent sat down at the table, his eyes lingering on Maya, he realized that everything was beginning to shift. The walls were coming down, and for the first time in a long while, he could see the future clearly. It wasn't just about power or control anymore. It was about love, loyalty, and the family he had been blind to for so long. And in that moment, he knew he would do anything to protect it. Vincent stood by the window of his office, staring out at the city lights that seemed to stretch endlessly before him. His thoughts were heavy, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. But for the first time in years, there was a shift. His mind was not consumed by the usual worries about his empire, about maintaining control, about staying one step ahead of everyone around him. No, this time, his thoughts were on something much more personal. Maya had become a constant presence in his life, a quiet force that had slowly but surely changed the dynamics of his family. It was hard to explain, but Vincent could feel it. This unspoken bond between them, one that had grown stronger with every passing day. Maya's connection with Ethan had brought a level of peace to his son that Vincent had never thought possible. And as much as he tried to deny it, he knew it was Maya who had made that difference. She had managed to reach his son in ways he never could. Vincent's role had always been to provide, to protect, to rule. He had built his empire with those principles, but in doing so, he had neglected what truly mattered. His family, Ethan, Maya. He had lived in a world of power, but it had come at the expense of real connection. He had spent so much time trying to protect his son, but now, he realized, he had been protecting him from the wrong things. Ethan needed understanding, patience, love, things Vincent had been too busy to give. The realization hit him harder than any of his past struggles. Vincent had always been the one to solve problems, to be in control, to find solutions. But when it came to Ethan, he had been powerless. And now, Maya, the woman, who had once seemed so distant, had become the one who truly understood. It was a humbling experience, and it shook Vincent to his core. The Mafia boss, the man who had never been afraid of anything, now found himself facing the hardest challenge of his life, learning how to be a father. Vincent's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He turned around to find Maya, standing in the doorway, her expression neutral, but her eyes filled with something that Vincent had come to recognize as concern. Mr. Mallory, she said quietly, I think it's time for us to have a conversation. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Vincent felt like he was on the receiving end of something important. Of course, he said, his voice steady, though his heart was beating faster than usual. Maya stepped into the room, but instead of sitting across from him as she usually did, She took a seat beside him. There was a small, but significant, shift in their dynamic, and Vincent could feel it. She wasn't just a maid, a caregiver. She was someone who had earned his respect, and now, perhaps, something more. "I've been thinking about Ethan," Maya began, her voice soft, but firm. "And I think it's time we talk about his future." Vincent's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working with him for a while now," Maya said, her gaze never leaving his. "And I believe he's ready to make more progress. But he needs more from you, Mr. Mallory. He needs your time. He needs your patience. He needs to know that you're here for him, truly here." Vincent swallowed, her words hitting him harder than he expected. For the first time, he realized just how much he had been missing, how much he had been giving up by keeping his distance from his son. Maya's words weren't just about Ethan. They were about Vincent, too. "I know I've made mistakes," Vincent admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been so focused on everything else, on keeping control, that I didn't realize how much I've neglected him." Maya nodded slowly, as though she understood. "You don't have to be perfect," she said gently. "Ethan doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be present. He needs you to show him that he matters, that you see him for who he is, not for who you want him to be." Vincent's chest tightened as he listened to her, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his regrets. He had spent so much time trying to protect his son from the world, from danger, from disappointment. But in doing so, he had neglected the most important thing of all, showing Ethan that he was loved for who he was. Maya's words pierced through the walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel vulnerable. "I've been so afraid," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Afraid of failing him, of not being enough. I've always known how to control everything, but when it came to Ethan, I felt powerless." Maya reached out, placing a hand on his arm in a gesture of comfort. "It's not about being perfect, Vincent," she said softly. "It's about being there for him. He needs you more than anything else." Vincent looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time, he truly saw her, not just as the woman who cared for his son, but as someone who had shown him a new way of seeing the world. A way that wasn't about control or power, but about love, patience, and presence. "Thank you," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Maya gave him a small, understanding smile. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Mallory." Vincent shook his head. "No, Maya," he said firmly. "You're doing much more than that." Maya's smile softened, and for a brief moment, there was a shared understanding between them. She had become more than just a part of his household. She had become someone who had helped him see what truly mattered. And in that moment, Vincent made a promise to himself. He would no longer hide behind the walls of his empire. He would be there for his son. He would show Ethan that he was loved. And with Maya's guidance, he knew he could start to be the father he had always wanted to be. The days that followed Vincent's conversation with Maya were different. Something had shifted, not just between them, but within Vincent himself. He began to spend more time with Ethan, something he had rarely done before. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that he had never truly known how to connect with his son. Maya had always been the bridge between them, and now Vincent was starting to understand what that bridge was built on. It wasn't about money or status, it wasn't about providing everything for Ethan. It was about being there, truly present. It was something Vincent had been avoiding for years, but now, with Maya's guidance, he felt like he could finally try. One evening, after dinner, Vincent sat with Ethan in the living room. Ethan had just finished his homework, a series of simple math problems that he had struggled with at first. But Vincent had helped him, step by step, and now Ethan was smiling, his face lighting up as he showed his father the answers he had gotten right. "Look, Dad," Ethan said, his voice a little hesitant but filled with pride. "I did it." Vincent looked at him, a smile tugging at his lips. "You did, buddy," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I'm proud of you." It wasn't much, but for Vincent, it was a moment he had never thought he would have. And for Ethan, it was everything. As they sat there, Vincent realized how much he had been missing all along. He had spent so much time working, focusing on his empire, thinking that everything would fall into place as long as he kept his grip tight on everything. But he had never stopped to consider what really mattered. What mattered was the time spent with the people you loved, showing them that they were valued. Maya had taught him that, in a way no one else could. She had been the one to help him see that Ethan's needs weren't about fixing him. They were about understanding him. Vincent leaned back in his chair, looking at his son, and felt a warmth fill him that had been absent for so long. It wasn't just pride in Ethan's progress. It was something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for years. Love. Love, not just for his son, but for the family he had been neglecting. And it was Maya who had made him realize that. Over the weeks that followed, Vincent found himself seeking out Maya more often. Not just because of Ethan, but because he realized she had become a key part of his life. Her quiet strength, her unwavering presence. She had done more for him than he could ever put into words. He wasn't sure how to express his gratitude, but he knew he had to try. One afternoon, after Ethan had gone to bed, Vincent asked Maya to stay after her shift. When she came into his office, he was standing by the window, looking out over the city, lost in thought. "Maya," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Ethan, about what you've done for us." Maya didn't say anything at first, just waited for him to continue. Vincent turned to face her, his expression serious. "I don't think I can ever thank you enough for what you've done," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so caught up in my own world, in my own plans, that I've missed the most important thing, my son. But you've been there for him, when I couldn't be. And I need you to know how much that means to me." Maya met his gaze, her eyes soft, but unwavering. "I'm just doing what I can," she said quietly. "What's best for Ethan, and for you." Vincent felt his chest tighten at her words. She was humble, never asking for anything in return. But he knew she deserved more than that. "You've done more than just help us, Maya," he said, his voice steady but full of sincerity. "You've changed everything. You've made me see things I've been too blind to see before. And I want you to know, I'm not going to let that go." Maya looked at him for a long moment, as though trying to gauge his sincerity. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cautious. Vincent stepped closer, his expression softening. "I want you to stay. For good. I don't just mean with Ethan, I mean as part of this family. You've earned that." Maya blinked, clearly taken aback by his words. She opened her mouth to say something, but hesitated. "Vincent," she began slowly, "I don't think I can accept that. I'm just here to do my job, to help Ethan. That's all I need." Vincent shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's not just about a job, Maya," he said. "It's about being part of something. You've already become part of this family, and I'm not letting you go. Not after everything you've done." Maya was silent for a long moment, her gaze shifting away as she seemed to process his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll stay." Vincent felt a wave of relief wash over him. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, with Maya standing there beside him, he knew one thing for sure. He was finally starting to understand what it meant to truly have a family. And Maya had helped him find that. It had been a few weeks since Vincent had made his decision, and things around the Mallory estate had started to settle into a new rhythm. There was still a sense of tension that lingered in the air, but it was different now. It wasn't the cold, calculated tension of business dealings or power struggles. It was a more subtle kind of tension, the kind that comes with change. Ethan had been responding well to the new routine. He was becoming more comfortable with Vincent, spending more time together in the evenings, working on his homework or simply watching television. It wasn't perfect. Ethan still had moments of frustration, moments when he withdrew into himself. But there were more moments of connection, more moments of real interaction. And those moments meant the world to Vincent. Maya, too, had adjusted to her new place in the family. She continued to care for Ethan with the same quiet dedication she always had. But there was a new dynamic between them. Vincent could see it in the way they looked at each other. There was a silent understanding, a bond that had been formed through months of working together to care for Ethan. Maya had become more than just the maid, more than just the caregiver. She had become a partner in raising his son, in building the kind of life Vincent had always dreamed of for Ethan, but had never known how to create. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, Vincent found himself walking through the halls of the estate. He wasn't sure where he was going, but his feet seemed to carry him toward the kitchen, toward Maya. When he arrived, he found her standing by the stove, stirring something in a pot. The smell of fresh vegetables and herbs filled the room, and for a moment, Vincent simply stood there, watching her work. There was something soothing about the way she moved, the way she effortlessly prepared meals, as though she had been doing this for years. "You're home early," Maya said, glancing over her shoulder as she caught sight of him standing in the doorway. Vincent smiled softly. "I just needed a break," he said, stepping into the room. "It's been a long day." Maya gave him a small nod, her attention turning back to the stove. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said. "You can sit down if you want." Vincent hesitated for a moment, then moved to the table and sat down. He had gotten used to these quiet moments with Maya, moments when there were no words needed, just the comfort of each other's presence. He watched her for a moment, then spoke softly. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began. Maya paused, turning to face him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice calm. Vincent took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about Ethan, about how much you've done for him, how much you've done for me." Maya's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, she seemed unsure of what to say. She had never been one for praise, never expected anything in return for her care. But Vincent's words were different. "You've made a difference, Maya," Vincent continued. "You've helped me see what I've been missing all these years. You've helped me see that family isn't just about providing. It's about being there, truly being there." Maya's eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, as though processing his words. When she looked up, there was a softness in her gaze. "You don't have to thank me, Vincent," she said quietly. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." Vincent shook his head, his voice firm. "No, Maya, you've done more than that. You've helped me become the father I should have been all along." There was a silence between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Vincent could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, but he didn't regret them. He had spent so many years trying to control everything, trying to make things perfect, but now he realized that perfection didn't matter. What mattered was the connection he had with Ethan, the relationship he was building with Maya, and the family they were slowly becoming. "I don't know what the future holds," Vincent said finally, his voice softer now. "But I know that I want you to be a part of it, Maya. Not just for Ethan, but for all of us. You've already become a part of this family, and I'm not going to let that go." Maya's eyes widened slightly, and she seemed to hesitate, unsure of how to respond. "Vincent, she stopped herself, her expression thoughtful. Vincent reached across the table, placing his hand on hers. "I'm not asking for anything more than what you're already giving," he said gently. "I just want you to know that you have a place here, a place with us." Maya looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, Vincent saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there, a sign that she was beginning to let down the walls she had built around herself, just as he had done. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what to say." Vincent smiled softly, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just know that you're not alone in this anymore. We're in this together." Maya nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Together," she echoed. And for the first time in a long while, Vincent believed that the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. With Maya by his side, with Ethan beginning to trust him, Vincent knew that they could face whatever came next as a family. The next few months passed in a quiet sort of harmony that Vincent had never imagined for himself. The changes that had begun within him were becoming more evident in his interactions with Ethan and Maya. For the first time, he found himself looking forward to spending evenings at home instead of retreating to his office or his other commitments. The late-night meetings, the constant rush of business deals, and the whirlwind of his Mafia dealings all seemed to take a back seat to the small, peaceful moments he now shared with his son and Maya. Ethan was thriving. Slowly but surely, he was becoming more comfortable with his father. The long silences that had once filled the room were now punctuated with laughter, with shared moments of understanding. Maya had been right. Ethan didn't need someone who could fix him. He needed someone who would show up, who would sit with him during his most difficult moments, who would listen without judgment. And Vincent was learning to do just that. He wasn't perfect, far from it. But every time he saw Ethan's face light up when he spoke to him, or when Ethan turned to him for comfort, Vincent felt the weight of his past mistakes lessen. It wasn't just the big moments that mattered. It was the small ones, too. The moments when Vincent would sit with Ethan in the garden, teaching him how to plant flowers, or when they would read together before bed. These moments were priceless. Maya, too, seemed more at ease. She had always been the steady presence in their lives, But now Vincent could see her truly flourishing in her role. There was a warmth in the house that hadn't existed before, a sense of security that came from knowing they had each other to rely on. Vincent often caught her looking at Ethan with a soft, protective gaze. There was no denying the bond between them, and Vincent was grateful for it. He had never expected to have someone like Maya in his life, someone who had quietly stepped into his world and changed it in ways he never thought possible. As the days went on, Vincent found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just because of the way she had taken care of his son, but because of the person she was. Maya had a quiet strength, an inner peace that Vincent couldn't quite explain. She wasn't like anyone he had ever known. She didn't seek attention, didn't crave recognition, but she had a heart full of kindness, and it had opened his eyes to what truly mattered. One evening, as they sat at dinner together, just the three of them, Vincent found himself watching Maya as she spoke to Ethan, encouraging him as he struggled with a new task. There was such ease in the way she spoke to him, such patience, that Vincent couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration. It was clear that Maya had a gift for reaching people, for making them feel seen and valued, and Vincent realized just how much he had come to depend on her. As the conversation drifted to something else, Vincent cleared his throat, suddenly feeling the weight of his thoughts. "Maya," he began, his voice a little quieter than usual, "there's something I've been meaning to say." Maya glanced at him, her expression curious but patient. "What is it?" she asked. Vincent hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for Ethan for me, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate it." "How much I appreciate you." Maya's eyes softened, but she didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, acknowledging his words. But Vincent could see the way she looked at him, the way her expression shifted slightly. It was as if she understood what he was trying to say, but was hesitant to hear it. Vincent leaned forward, his voice steady but sincere. "I've come to realize that I don't want you to be just someone who works for us. I want you to be part of this family, Maya. Not because of what you do for us, but because of who you are. You've already become an important part of our lives." Maya blinked, clearly taken aback by his words. She opened her mouth to respond, but then paused, as if searching for the right words. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Vincent, I'm here because I care about Ethan. I always have, and I always will. But I've never expected anything in return." Vincent smiled gently, shaking his head. "I know that, and I don't want you to feel like I'm asking for more from you. What I'm saying is that I want to make sure you know that you're not just here because of a job. You're part of this family now. You've earned that." Maya's gaze softened, and for the first time, Vincent saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she said quietly. "I've never been part of a family like this before. I've always been on the outside, looking in. But what you're saying, it means a lot to me." Vincent reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. "You're not on the outside anymore," he said softly. "You never were. You've always been a part of this, whether you realized it or not." Maya smiled then, a smile that seemed to soften the edges of the room. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. Vincent nodded, feeling a weight lift from his chest. He had never thought this day would come, but here it was. He had a family now, his son, his home, and Maya, the woman who had taught him what it meant to truly be present. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. With Maya by his side, he could face whatever came next. Together, they had already built something stronger than Vincent had ever imagined. And for the first time, he believed in the possibility of a future filled with real love and connection. Vincent woke up earlier than usual the next morning, the pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains. He lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the estate, a peacefulness that had become more familiar to him in recent weeks. He had spent so many years living in a world full of noise, power plays, and constant movement, but now, with Maya's presence, there was a different kind of stillness in his life. The kind of stillness that didn't come from avoiding conflict, but from learning to embrace it, to face the challenges head-on and make room for the quiet moments. He glanced at the clock on his bedside table and sighed, realizing it was still early. He had a meeting scheduled with his associates later in the day, but for now, he relished the rare silence. It was a time he had come to cherish, even if only for a few moments in the morning. As he lay there, his thoughts turned to Maya. Since the night they had spoken in the kitchen, something had shifted between them. Their dynamic had always been defined by necessity. She was there to care for Ethan, and he was there to provide. But now, Vincent was starting to see her as more than just someone who filled a role in his household. She was someone who had changed him, someone who had given him a new perspective on life. He had always thought of himself as self-sufficient, capable of handling everything that came his way. But Maya had shown him that there was more to life than just control and power. There was a deeper connection that came from sharing moments, from allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and from offering love without expecting anything in return. Maya had done that for him without even trying. Vincent could still feel the weight of her words when she had told him that she wasn't seeking anything from him. That, despite everything, she was there because she cared. He knew she had meant it, and for the first time in a long time, Vincent had felt that kind of care. It was humbling. After a few moments, he pushed himself out of bed, the weight of his thoughts settling into his chest. He went about his morning routine, his mind still wandering back to Maya and Ethan. He had been so wrapped up in his own world that he had missed the small, simple joys of being a father. Now, every time he looked at Ethan, he saw something different. His son's eyes, once filled with confusion and frustration, were beginning to shine with a new sense of understanding. The way Ethan had smiled at him the other day, when they had shared that simple moment of connection, it had been enough to change everything. Vincent knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be challenges, difficult moments, and misunderstandings. But he was ready to face them, ready to be the father Ethan needed him to be. And Maya, she had shown him what it meant to be present, to show up not just in the big moments, but in the small, everyday ones. He would do whatever it took to make sure Ethan knew he wasn't alone. As Vincent prepared for his meeting, he couldn't help but think about the kind of man he wanted to be. He had spent so much time focusing on his reputation, on building his empire, but in the end, it was his family that mattered most. He had spent years building walls around himself, and now, he was slowly beginning to tear them down. He had learned that real power didn't come from control, it came from understanding, from connection, and from the willingness to show up for the people you cared about. As Vincent walked down the stairs toward the meeting room, he saw Maya in the hallway, her soft voice drifting out from the kitchen as she spoke to Ethan. The sight of them together made his chest swell with something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper. It was the recognition that he had been given a second chance to be the father he had always wanted to be, and that Maya was the person who had helped him see that. Maya looked up as he approached, her gaze meeting his with that quiet understanding that had become so familiar to him. "Good morning, Mr. Mallory," she said, her voice steady, but warm. Vincent smiled, his heart light for the first time in a long time. "Good morning, Maya," he replied. "How's Ethan today?" "He's doing well," Maya said, her eyes softening as she spoke of Ethan. "He's been working on his reading and writing. He's making progress, Vincent. I'm really proud of him." Vincent's heart swelled at the mention of Ethan's progress. He had seen it too. The little steps forward, the way his son was starting to trust him more, to open up. "I'm proud of him too," he said softly. "And I'm proud of you, Maya. I know I don't say it enough, but I don't know where we'd be without you." Maya looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a small smile, she nodded. "Thank you, Vincent. That means more than you know." There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond that had been forged through shared moments, through trust and care. Vincent knew that things weren't perfect, that there were still obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, he felt like they were on the right path. He wasn't just the Mafia boss anymore. He was a father. He was a part of something real. And Maya, in her quiet way, had made him see that. As the day went on, Vincent found himself more and more grateful for the changes in his life. The business meetings felt less pressing, less important. His family, his home, had become his focus. And as he looked ahead, he saw the possibility of a future filled with more than just power. He saw the possibility of love, of connection, of a real family. With Maya by his side, Vincent knew they could face anything that came their way. Weeks went by, and Vincent found himself in a place he had never imagined. The rhythms of his life had shifted in ways he had once thought impossible. The house, once filled with a cold, distant atmosphere, was now alive with laughter, with conversation, with the gentle hum of normalcy. It wasn't just about the absence of conflict. It was about the presence of something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: connection. Maya had become an integral part of their lives, but not just in the way she cared for Ethan. It was the way she had quietly woven herself into the fabric of their family, her steady presence bringing a sense of calm and balance. Vincent had once thought that the key to everything was power, control, and status. But now, he was learning that the key to a fulfilling life was love, vulnerability, and the willingness to share moments with the people who mattered. Ethan's progress had been remarkable. The boy who had once withdrawn from the world was now engaging more, expressing himself in ways that Vincent hadn't thought possible. He was still a work in progress, but each small victory felt monumental. Vincent found himself spending more time with Ethan, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to be there for his son. He took time to sit with him during homework, to read together before bed, to simply be present. Maya had given him the space to become the father he had always wanted to be. And with each passing day, Vincent found himself growing more grateful for her quiet guidance. One afternoon, as Vincent sat with Ethan in the garden, they worked together on planting a new set of flowers that Maya had brought. Ethan's small hands carefully placed each seedling into the soil, and Vincent watched as his son's face lit up with concentration. It wasn't the most extraordinary moment, but to Vincent, it was everything. He had missed these moments. He had been so consumed by his work, by the demands of his world, that he had failed to notice the small moments of connection with the people he loved. He realized, as he watched Ethan, that these were the moments that truly mattered. Not the meetings, not the deals, not the power he had accumulated. These moments. As they finished planting, Vincent looked at Ethan with pride. "You did a great job, buddy," he said, ruffling Ethan's hair. The boy smiled up at him, his eyes bright with joy. "Thanks, Dad," he said shyly, his voice still tentative but filled with warmth. Vincent's heart swelled at the simple words. It was the first time Ethan had called him Dad, without hesitation, and it meant more to him than anything else. He realized, in that moment, that he had earned it. Maya appeared in the doorway of the garden, watching them with a soft smile on her face. "Looks like you're making good progress out here," she said, her voice gentle. Vincent turned to look at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks to Ethan," he replied, his tone warm. Maya stepped forward, her gaze moving from Vincent to Ethan and back again. "You're both doing great," she said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. Vincent felt a surge of gratitude toward her. He knew that without her, none of this would have been possible. She had been the one to help him see what he had been missing, and she had given him the tools to start building a better relationship with Ethan. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Maya," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. She looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "You've done the hard part. You're here. You're present." Vincent's chest tightened at her words. It was true. He had spent so much of his life running from vulnerability, from real connection, and now, for the first time, he was learning how to be open, how to show up for his son, for Maya, for himself. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was more than he had ever done before. "I'm going to keep trying," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "For Ethan. For you. For us." Maya smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "That's all anyone can ask for," she said softly. As the evening settled in, the three of them gathered around the dinner table, the sound of clinking silverware and casual conversation filling the air. It wasn't the grandeur of Vincent's past life, the world of power and influence he had once ruled, but it was something better. It was real. It was theirs. And as Vincent looked at Ethan, and then at Maya, he realized something profound. He had found a family, not through his wealth, not through his empire, but through the simple act of being present. It wasn't always going to be easy, but he knew that, with Maya and Ethan by his side, he could face anything that came their way. They were his family now, and nothing, not even the world he had once controlled, could take that away. Months passed, and the steady change in Vincent's life began to feel less like an adjustment and more like a natural progression. Ethan's growth, while still slow, was undeniable. The moments of connection, those small victories, like when Ethan reached out for his father's hand or when he laughed at something Vincent said, became more frequent. The tension that had once consumed Vincent's every waking hour had softened. replaced by a newfound sense of peace that he hadn't realized he craved. Maya, too, had settled into her role. No longer just a caregiver, she had become a cornerstone of their small family, a constant presence in their lives that offered more than just help. She offered stability. Her calm, understanding demeanor had made a profound impact on both father and son, and as Vincent watched her interact with Ethan, he found himself silently marveling at the connection she had with the boy. It wasn't just that Maya was good with Ethan. It was that she truly understood him in a way Vincent had never been able to. It was a humbling realization, one that made Vincent question all of his past assumptions about what it meant to be a parent. The weight of his past decisions, the years he had spent building his empire at the expense of his family, didn't feel as heavy now. He had come to terms with the fact that no amount of wealth or power could replace the relationships that truly mattered. And now, for the first time, he was actively building those relationships, starting with Ethan and continuing with Maya. The days were no longer filled with meetings or silent hours spent in his study. Instead, Vincent found himself making time for simple moments with his son. They would go on walks together, visit the park, or just spend time talking. Moments that Vincent once took for granted but now cherished deeply. He realized that it wasn't about grand gestures or perfect solutions. It was about showing up, being present in the small moments, and letting his son know he was loved and valued. Maya, too, had her own way of showing up. She never demanded attention, never sought out accolades for the work she did. But Vincent knew, without a doubt, that none of this would have been possible without her. He could never repay her for the way she had cared for Ethan, the way she had guided him toward becoming the father he always wanted to be. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Vincent found himself sitting in the living room with Maya, the two of them sharing a rare moment of solitude. Ethan had already gone to bed, and the house was unusually quiet. For a brief moment, it was just the two of them, without the weight of responsibilities or the constant pressure of the outside world. Vincent glanced over at Maya, who was sitting across from him, her eyes focused on the fire flickering in the hearth. She had always been so composed, so steady, but tonight, there was a softness to her that Vincent hadn't seen before. "You know, Maya," Vincent said, his voice low and sincere, "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately, about how far we've come, and how much you've done for Ethan. For me." Maya looked at him, her expression neutral but warm. "You don't have to thank me," she said gently. "I'm just doing what I can." Vincent shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "No, it's not just that," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's more than just helping us. You've changed everything. You've shown me what I've been missing all these years." Maya didn't respond right away, her gaze softening as she took in his words. She had always been someone who preferred to stay in the background, never seeking attention or praise. But Vincent could see how his words affected her. "I'm not perfect," he continued, his voice a little thicker now. "I've made a lot of mistakes. But I'm trying, Maya. I'm trying to be the father Ethan needs, and I'm trying to be better for him, for you, for all of us." Maya's eyes softened, and she gave him a small, understanding smile. "You don't have to be perfect," she said quietly. "You're already doing it, Vincent. You're here. That's what matters." Vincent leaned back in his chair, absorbing her words. He had spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to control everything around him, but Maya was right. Perfection didn't matter. What mattered was showing up, being present, and doing the best he could with what he had. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I don't know how I could ever repay you for what you've done, Maya. You've helped me see what I couldn't before. You've helped me become the man I'm supposed to be." Maya's smile deepened, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged with unspoken understanding. She didn't need him to repay her, not in any way that he could. She had already given him more than he could have asked for. But Vincent knew that he would spend the rest of his life trying to show her how much he appreciated her, how much she had changed everything for him. The quiet moment stretched between them, comfortable and filled with meaning. Vincent didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was no longer afraid. He had a family now, a real family, and he knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. With Maya by his side, with Ethan growing stronger each day, Vincent felt like he could handle anything. His life had taken a turn he never expected, but it was the best turn he could have imagined. He was learning, finally, how to be the father his son deserved, and the man Maya had always believed he could be. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythms of life at the Mallory estate. What once felt like an unyielding, chaotic force now settled into a more familiar, comfortable pace. Ethan continued to flourish under the care and patience of Maya, and Vincent, now fully involved in his son's life, found himself relishing every moment. There were still days when the weight of his past actions seemed heavy, but they were fewer now. Each time he saw Ethan smile or heard him speak with more confidence, Vincent felt the burden lighten just a little. He had never imagined this life for himself, the life he now lived with Maya and Ethan. There was no empire to conquer here, no business deals to finalize, no power struggles to win. But what he had found instead was far more valuable. As the weeks passed, Vincent became more attuned to the needs of his son. He spent time listening to Ethan, taking long walks in the garden with him, and even helping with schoolwork in the evenings. The bond between them grew stronger each day. Ethan, who once seemed like a puzzle Vincent couldn't solve, was slowly revealing himself. There were still moments of frustration and confusion, but they were paired with breakthroughs, small steps forward that Vincent celebrated wholeheartedly. Maya, as always, was there to guide him. She had become not just a caregiver, but a mentor to him in many ways. Her patience, her wisdom, and her quiet strength had shown him how to be present, how to listen, and how to show up for his son in ways that didn't involve solving problems, but simply being there. Vincent had learned more from her in the past few months than he had in all the years before. One evening, after dinner, as they all sat together in the living room, Vincent watched Ethan carefully. His son was sitting on the floor, playing with his toys, a look of concentration on his face. Maya sat nearby, reading a book, while Vincent leaned back in his chair, taking in the sight of his family. It was a simple scene, one that would have been unnoticed in another life. But for Vincent, it was everything. He realized that he had spent so many years running away from moments like this, thinking they weren't important. But now, sitting in the quiet of his own home, he understood that these moments, these small, everyday moments, were the ones that truly mattered. "He's growing up so fast," Maya said softly, her voice breaking the silence. Vincent looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "He is," he replied, his voice low. "And I'm actually here for it. I wasn't before, but I'm here now." Maya smiled at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're doing great, Vincent. I know it's not easy, but you're doing it. You're showing up." Vincent smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had come a long way since that first day when he realized how much he had missed. But the journey wasn't over yet. "I'm trying," he said simply. "And I'll keep trying." He looked over at Ethan, who was now showing Maya something he had built with his toys. Maya leaned over, nodding with approval, and Ethan beamed with pride. Vincent's heart swelled at the sight. This was his son, his family, and he wasn't going to take them for granted again. As the evening went on, Vincent found himself more and more at peace. The chaos of his former life felt distant, like a memory from another world. The world he had now was one he had built with patience, with care, and with love. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in his life, Vincent Mallory was okay with that. Maya had taught him that perfection didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had, the trust they were building, and the love they shared. And he was ready to embrace it fully. The next morning, as Vincent and Maya shared a quiet breakfast together, he looked at her across the table, his expression serious but filled with gratitude. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady, "about everything you've done for us. For Ethan. For me. And I want you to know that I won't take it for granted anymore." Maya met his gaze, her expression soft. "Vincent, you don't have to thank me," she said gently. "I'm just here to help. To be there when you need me." Vincent shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "No," he said, his voice firm. "You've done more than that. You've helped me become someone I never thought I could be. Someone who can be present, who can love without reservation. You've given me the tools to be a better father." Maya's eyes softened at his words, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she simply reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "You've always had that in you, Vincent," she said quietly. "You just needed to see it for yourself." Vincent held her gaze for a moment, and in that moment, he realized something. It wasn't just about the changes he had made. It was about the future they were all building together. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew that with Maya and Ethan by his side, he was ready for whatever came their way. They were a family, and that was enough. That was everything. As the day unfolded, Vincent felt a sense of peace he had never known. The world outside could do what it wanted, but inside these walls, inside his home, he had everything he needed. And as he watched Maya and Ethan laughing together, sharing a moment that was simple but perfect in its own way, Vincent knew that this was his real victory. This was the life he had always wanted, and he was finally living it. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had everything they needed.